Hi, everyone. This is Raquel.
Hi, and this is Jennifer.
Welcome to Madness Cafe.
This is a feminist podcast where we talk about women's issues, politics, and health and wellness.
And where those issues intersect. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Madness Cafe. Jennifer and I are joined by yet another one of our friends from high school. As we have said before on the podcast, Jennifer and I both are quite blessed in that we know really amazing people who do really amazing things. So we have them on our show. So we get to talk about them and help highlight them and what they're doing. Today, our friend from high school, Dominic Travis, is joining us. And Dominic is he's smart as hell, basically, to just put that out there. I mean, the guy's a big old brainiac. And he is a chief program officer of a major wildlife rehab organization. And he has spent his career working on disease spillover from wildlife. And yes, all that is amazing, which is great. But one of the reasons why Dominic is on the show is because, and I'm using his words now, he wanted us to use him as an example of an old gray white guy who wants to get it right, but wants help. So there we go. Dominic is here. Dominic, thank you so much for being on our show. It's good to see you.
Hi, thank you. That was a more than nice introduction, so I appreciate that. I'm not sure it's true, but we'll go with it. It's great to see you again after a long, long time.
You too.
Long time. It's so hard to know how to start this podcast with you because, as Raquel said, you know so much, and I just want to pick your brain with all sorts of questions about what you do. But then I'm also really interested in your perspective on wanting to get it right. So I think I'm going to leave it up to you. I'm going to let you introduce yourself and you decide the direction we're going today. How do you want to start?
How about the quick snippet of how we ended up here, which is relevant, and then I can kind of introduce, if you want the professional part of that, I can introduce that. Because getting to the end, I have recently, for the last 12 years, been at the University of Minnesota at the College of Veterinary Medicine and School of Public Health, going through lockdown and many Twin Cities challenges, from the Me Too, quickly into COVID, quickly into George Floyd, and obviously anti-racism and everything else. So on Facebook, right, Raquel, you started a book club.
Yes.
And I know you guys have told your story on that. And I was really struggling to enter this conversation at a deeper level than I had. And it's not that I was without experience, but we each unpeel a layer of the onion and then it's raw and you go back deeper and deeper. So I was living in the Twin Cities, experiencing that with kids. At the same time, trying to be a part of the University of Minnesota community that was attempting to lean in and didn't quite know how. Maybe analysis paralysis. There are many people at the university who are amazing, but as a community, I think we were learning. So I didn't get to participate. I read every one of the books that you recommended, but things were so crazy that I didn't get to participate. So I wanted to reach back out and participate now. So that's how we started getting here, and I can answer background stuff if you want as well.
Well, I'm curious about that. In all of the books that we read, did any of them speak to you? Like, was one like, wow, that book was awesome?
Well, I mean, all of them, but I think being someone who's still trying to understand what they don't know. So you want to talk about race, I think was the first one that you did. That one was a perfect starter that made me go apologize for a few things
Me too.
and reboot. Yep, and reboot. Certainly white fragility. We actually did that as a book club. We were doing some Native American, tribal, indigenous culture kind of things at the same time here. Minnesota has a pretty bad history in that as well. So that was a parallel. And I work in a profession, veterinary medicine, that is dominated by women in numbers, but not in power. So we were going through a number of these conversations in parallel. So both of those were, I think, fundamental. And then I think, did you guys read, or did I get the new the new Jim Crow?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Mhm.
that one for that like didactic mind of like the history of law and
Mhm.
structured issues. And again, I don't always say the words right, so forgive me. But structured racism, structured everythingism, it blew my mind. I
Yeah, me
did
too.
not understand. That opened my eyes to the structural part of this. So I think
Yes.
each one of those three made a really big impact in a different way for my own, hey, go do your homework first, shut up, and then come talk kind of lesson.
Well, and I have to applaud you a bit on that, because part of the struggle with this and with doing this sort of work is that a lot of people will hear the talk about this or read the books and see it as a personal attack and then just back away and take it personally, and they just do nothing with it, and they're just like, oh, well, I didn't do it, it wasn't me, instead of reading the book or listening to somebody and then taking the time to dig deeper within themselves. I want to applaud you first off for doing that, and for acknowledging that, hey, there's a lot that I don't know. Let me listen to people who know more about this than I do. So
Well,
kudos to you for that.
I appreciate that. That was the lesson of the time, one of them, one of many for me. And I can tell you, deciding how embarrassed I want to be in front of all of our friends, some lessons, some raw lessons that got me there
Mhm.
of learning that being neutral or thinking that you do no harm is either good enough or not just implicit bias or, I could use many of the terms, some of those lessons. And that's born out of the rest of my introduction. If you'd like me to segue to that a little bit,
Yeah,
because these
yeah,
stories
absolutely.
intertwine. I'm a veterinarian who specialized in global health
Mhm.
and wildlife epidemiology. So kind of the mixture of conservation, wildlife medicine, and public health or global health. And in that sense, I've worked internationally most of my career, and that was my goal. And I am very proud of the way in which I interact culturally
Mhm.
and the way in which I have worked with international students in developing countries and underserved communities and worked through in community engagement. Certainly tons of lessons and improvement always there as well.
Mhm.
But one day at University of Minnesota during this time, I woke up, and even in my tenure documents where you write your 150-page statement that is keep me forever and let me
Yeah.
be great professor guy and these things, I listed, bragged about the diversity and my affirmative action in taking students and
Mhm.
things like that, but it was all international.
Mm.
And I woke up one
Mhm.
day and said, is international cultural development and competency, which cultural competency isn't even the right way to say it anymore, in
Mhm.
that the same as working on DEI domestically? And it's
Mhm.
not. And I was realized that I was getting all my credit, almost all my credit, much of my credit through my international work, and had not even engaged in a way that I wanted to domestically, because I'm a global health person in that
Mhm.
way.
Sure.
And I thought I was getting credit.
Mhm.
And actually, that was part of the big lesson, at which point I said, wow, I need to figure this out kind of domestically and drill into that and figure out what it means in this country with our own special problems and history versus my time in South Africa or my time in Kenya and Uganda, which are very different examples of similar issues.
Right. And I just want to point out really quick, you said DEI, and I just want to point out for people who don't know what that is, it stands for diversity, equity, and inclusion. And that's the phrasing that's being used now for diversity efforts that are being undertaken in corporations and universities and larger organizations, or and some smaller organizations, to be fair. Dominic, I want you to talk a little bit about how you made that transition from thinking about diversity and the work that you were doing, your kudos basically in that work internationally, and then that jump to saying, hey, I need to do more here at home, or what do I need to do here at home?
Yeah, no problem. stepping back, right? Middle class, white male, cares but doesn't get it.
Mhm,
Goes to our high school, which was a very diverse high school.
mhm,
Lots of friends, don't get it. Played sports, made friends through sports, was part of busing for the whole time in our town that we grew up in, and learned about why later, right? And the benefits of that later. So I thought, and then went to school in the South. So went to North Carolina State, slammed up against some more transparent lack
mhm,
of diversity,
mhm,
if you will, and thought, look at me, I'm from the North, I'm one of the good guys, right? And look at me and look at the high school I went to. Wow, I get it. And it didn't had no clue that I didn't get it, right? But at least prepared me to have the opinion or the attitude of being an ally in that way of kind of, I'm colorblind, in the way you used to be able to say that, right?
yeah.
Before you realize that that's not true. But I was that, and I meant it, and that doesn't
Mhm,
mean I was perfect. So come back from the South, head into Michigan State for vet school, different set of issues. Ended up going through an internship and residency and graduate school after that. So 12, 13 years in college. Some of that's because it took me 6 years to get through undergrad, and I had some fun. Landed at Lincoln Park Zoo in Chicago.
mhm.
And I'm getting to answer your question. This one's a little long because
Yeah,
I want to
no,
do the whole
take
thing.
your time. Do it justice.
The people that know me that are listening to this are now laughing. They're hoping you're not spending the whole hour on this question. So Lincoln Park Zoo, helped. I joined the veterinary department. Then we built a conservation and science department, and we decided we were going to be research focused and be global. As that expanded, I became vice president of conservation and science. We had 5 centers of excellence. We worked in 23 countries, I think, and it was very much a global conservation, and I was in charge of the health part of that.
Mhm,
So conservation and health. And one day our institution woke up, and we prided ourselves with the mayor on working with the mayor on literacy projects and other kinds of things through our education department. 11, I think, gates that are open 24 hours a day, shut down only 3 times since the Civil War. Aren't we the most welcoming place in the world?
mhm,
And I started to learn, just because you are equitable doesn't mean you're diverse. And I started trying to understand, and especially this issue of, if you welcome people, if you have pipelines, if you hire appropriately and appropriate representation, that doesn't mean you have a culture that is a good place to land and keep people, right? So
Amen.
we went through some amazing diversity training at the time, and this was in like 2005-ish. We had visitor behavior research, where we studied how people interacted with our exhibits to understand everything from flow to their perceptions of conservation to community, et cetera. And we started noticing some trends with our very monotoned docent crews,
Mhm,
in the interactions. And we started understanding that the people we had in charge of connecting to the people coming in did not match them as much as they could. And therefore, the interactions were less amazing than they could have been. And
mhm,
so we decided to undergo an entire kind of diversity training overhaul. And I got interested enough because the trainer was so good that I wanted to become a trainer. And then we did things like address some things head on that, of course, we lost a third of the docents kind of the next day. They were very insulted, and staff as well. And then they started coming back as we worked together and things. But we went through a huge upheaval during that time. And now they've got huge diversity projects and just really great community engagement projects. They've come an amazing way. But it woke me up to a lot of this. And
mhm,
I thought, oh, look at all these lessons learned. I'm going to go work for USAID. I'm going to work as an ambassador to building networks in East Africa, where all my research was and still is. Well, until recently, I guess. And so I went to live in Uganda, and I had been there so much, including going to school in South Africa and Zimbabwe in the 90s, and Mandela's first year of office, and things like that, that that I really felt comfortably internationally, and really felt that the lessons I had learned at the zoo served me well to be a better international person. So I just drilled into that until University of Minnesota, George Floyd smacked me in the face, and just there was a national STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math reflection day where they asked everybody to shut down their labs. It's online, and think, reflect, have group meetings, have individual reflections. And I took it seriously, and I went in and thought about all the things that I think I know, or tried to understand what I thought I didn't even know yet. And I made a big list, and I actually presented that to our department as a way to try and get the conversation going. And at that point, we were all forming a lot of conversation committees and book clubs and self-study, and it just went from there. So this waking up was that day, literally, where I did the reflection and said, I should get no credit for my international work domestically. It doesn't mean I haven't tried and done some decent things. And I don't know how to engage here. And I just kind of started from zero, and now I'm a work in progress.
Good. Thank you for being so candid about that and so open about it. How has that reflection and that sort of that realization presented itself in your personal life, though? Not just at work. I mean, we all have work, but how is that presenting in your day-to-day interactions with friends, with your family, all that?
Yeah. I think that you talked about this kind of, there's a wave of energy and excitement, and then you go back to your day life, kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
We're all set up how we're set up. And if you know Minnesota and you know the Twin Cities, there is overt segregation. It's a little less than some areas where it's literally blocked by neighborhood, but it's bad. And most of it is not diverse, right? So I have not moved to a new neighborhood where I've become incredibly diverse in my daily living. I have focused most of my energy on supporting the growth of my kids and some explicit decisions. As a matter of fact, my new job that we're not really discussing today because I've just arrived there was an explicit attempt to honestly get out of this environment, which is not bad for me personally and my kids. It is a very good, nurturing environment for my family in that way. But specifically, get out of our comfort zone, move across the country, go somewhere else, and think and live and get exposed differently with that. So I now split time in different geographies, and I am actively working through a new job to work on that professionally, but also getting ready to move the family into a place where we can access much more diversity. Because before, I was thinking about international. Again, we're going to go on sabbatical, we're going to do this, and now we're doing domestic movement to be in a place where we can construct that exposure and that daily involvement, weekly involvement, much better. So I don't know if that answers it. I'm a pretty positive person to meet with, come across, and things like that. I haven't found I need to not walk on the other side of the street, or some of these, I think the way we grew up and the diversity we grew up with, I don't have personal hesitancies about anything or anything like that. I think what I need to do is put myself in a position where I am more embedded in diversity of all kinds and more interactive, and thus daily more supportive in my life and my family's life. The other thing is, at the university, there were lots of ways to get involved. Everything from the different volunteering you could do, but also the activist groups and the digging in and trying to set good new kind of standards and baselines in the university environment. And so that's not just the job, that's very personal, and it's getting in. And so again, figuring out new ways to learn, new ways to do self-learning, to do group learning, and to get exposed to things in my personal life as well. I don't know if that's specific enough for you.
No, that's good. Don't worry, we'll get really specific later. It's fine.
I want to actually change the subject a little bit if you two are into it.
Sure.
I think this is all awesome. I think that it's a really incredible spot to be in someone's life when something like George Floyd or any of the hundreds of other things that could have spurred us all on to make a change. I think that's really amazing, Dominic. And I think that you are correct in that we were in a high school that offered us a lot of opportunity that a lot of other people didn't experience.
Mhm.
That being said, Raquel and I have talked a lot about that high school and the history that we're taught versus the history that's being taught nowadays. There's been a lot of change, and maybe not for the good in that regard. What do you think about the history you want taught to your children, or what's going on with that right now?
Or maybe even the history that you're trying to learn yourself.
Oh yeah, good point.
Yeah. No, I mean, everything from how the history of Vietnam wasn't even taught, right? So the political parts of that to,
Yeah.
I mean, I don't want to rag on our high school too much kind of thing,
No,
but I
me
think
neither. Me neither.
there's a long way to go. And unfortunately, our principal, Mr. Caldwell,
Yeah.
just passed, and I think he did a lot to try and change the system. And I look back now and I didn't realize that back in the day. But yeah, I think I was a history major in one of my majors before I hit marine biology and zoology. I think history is taught very poorly. I think it's taught by those who have the privilege to create it.
Mhm.
And I believe that we have to dig much, much deeper, and you have to actively go do that. And so I am always exploring, how can I go learn more? How can I go get more real truth, more diverse truth in that way? Because I don't think we do a good job. And I think my kids actually go to school that is one step better, but not good enough. They are learning about, Minnesota, indigenous cultures, the tribes, the history, and how bad it was in a much more real version, which makes me really happy to see. But even then, there's a level of scrubbing that still happens, right?
Mhm.
And in your own words, from an old white, you didn't say privilege, but an old white privileged
Oh, you
man,
can say it.
why would you want your kids to learn that? They're safe right now. Why do you want them to learn that?
Isn't it going to
Yeah.
hurt their feelings? Isn't it going to make them feel bad about themselves?
Yeah.
Right. Oh, yeah. No, so on one hand, remember, I've grown up half the time in different parts of Africa, and the guilt part of that is real, and not knowing what to do about that in the colonial, neo-colonial kind of ways is real. And what I'm now transferring is that guilt here, and it is real, and it is hard, and it is paralyzing a lot of times. Paralyzing to the effect that in my new institution, we just had a diversity training last week, and I stood up and said, the analysis paralysis that comes from doing something wrong, incorrectly,
Yes.
or destructively because you don't know how to be constructive, is something that and people like me, whoever they are, need to work through, because you're not becoming an ally if you're paralyzed, right? You're
Yeah.
not becoming useful if you're paralyzed. So first and foremost, I think you need to care.
Yeah.
So my answer to you is I care, and I don't know why I care, but I do. And maybe it's just because we were all brought up in a way that I perceived was better than the baseline.
Well, you care
Yeah,
because you
I
have a good
agree.
heart.
Hmm?
You care because you're a good person and you have a good heart. I mean,
Well, I'm not going to do like, look at me,
well, no, I mean, I'm
you know,
not
but
saying
I
pat on
care.
the
I
back
do
kind of
care.
thing, but yeah.
I care about fairness. I care about getting it right. I wanted to be a
Yeah.
judge when I was younger. That whole thing. People are going to laugh at that, but I do, and I think you have to care about fairness, and it's just fundamentally fair and fighting for fairness. I'm not saying that's all you do, because there's a lot more to do on top of that, but I think it's all embedded in that fundamental, and who defines fair, and I get we can unpack that, but
Mhm.
we need to get at fairness and citizenship and caring and just this fundamental unfairness. That's where I'm coming from. And then I'm learning, okay, what's not fair? How is it not fair? How much is it not fair? How do you try and help? And if you say that to Native American communities, that's the worst word you could say. I don't know about different ethnic or racial communities, if that's the worst thing you can say, but I can tell you it's the first thing we're taught when engaging tribes, and because everybody's tried to help. And but how can you do that? So I feel like it's a ladder that you need to climb, but it's all fundamentally like, do you care? And I do.
Okay, I want to point out something that you point out a little bit, that you touched on, that that Native Americans don't want you to try to help, right? So you're deferring to them. You're deferring to the people that you are trying to be an ally of. That, I think, is incredibly important, regardless of who you're trying to be an ally of or to. Listen to them. They will tell you. We as women will tell you. We as Black people will tell you. Listen to us. It's our experience that allies need to learn from. So I think that's a really important point, and I think it's good that you touched on that. And maybe that's something that other people can take away from this conversation, is defer to the people that you're trying to be an ally for.
But let me double down on that.
Yeah.
So listening is not something that it was a giant part of my skill set for many years. I could preach it, but I was less than a stellar practitioner. Now, a lot of that is passion and excitement and running over people with that. And some of it is all of the structured stuff that just is what it is. And I don't deny any of it. However, 10-ish years ago, I started working on the listening part. I didn't know it, but I started working on the humility part, which is part of the listening part, right? And it was in the cultural development. And I will admit, it was not in the domestic way. It was more in that international development, global health kind of neo-colonial deconstructing kind of way. But all of these lessons, right, they apply to many different areas. And so it's not just listening, right, but how you listen. So here comes embarrassing story number 2. When George Floyd, I've had a number of great African American or Black, and I'm not sure what I can appropriately use right now, because it was always African American, and they were my African American mentors. So you can say, oh no, everybody shifted to Black now, and that would be good for me to know.
Actually, it's the other way around, but that's fine.
Okay, so I would like to know that, because I will say I don't get consistent answers to that message.
Well,
and
yeah,
when you're trying to figure out,
have different preferences, so it's fine.
yeah, and that's part of trying to figure out how to be better. But I need a little bit of a rule book sometimes to figure that out, because I want to be respectful. So 3 really huge mentors, and I will leave them out, but they are significant figures in the world of veterinary medicine right now, either in the universities or in museum institutions. And we've had really good open discussions for many years. And in my kind of freaking out, oh, how can I help fix, right? Be a fixer. I'm a guy, look at me, trying not to be. I reached out at a time that was a very bad time to reach out. And I said, please give me all this knowledge so I can help at the worst time possible. Simmered down, read your book. The first one went, oh, chapter 2, that was the worst thing I could have done. Wrote back and said, forget I said anything. Just know I'm here. If you want to get people together to think through this, I'm your man. Just know, and I'm going to leave you alone and go do my own homework kind of thing. Tried to correct that fairly quickly with unbelievable amount of embarrassment and shame to some layers. I had become a decent listener, and I tried to actively listen, and in doing that, I added to some of the stress in the moment. And so another evolutionary cycle was, don't actively pursue your mentors at a time when they're doing everything they can to stay afloat in the way that you're trying to evolve, help, lean in, be an ally, etc. So I think listening, but then appropriate listening at appropriate times in appropriate ways was my part B of that lesson, and it was a hard one.
Oh my God, that's huge. I don't know many people who would be able to talk about that way. That's a huge lesson. I've had that. I've had that happen myself in work situations where I'm just trying to run around and fix everything and making a big old mess for people to clean up.
Yeah,
That's
Raquel,
huge.
I was about to do that to you, but I learned it like 10 minutes before. And then I got really ashamed, and I just went and started reading books with that. And I just kind of shut it down, and now I'm kind of back. So,
well, I appreciate you being very candid about that. I mean, I've said before, yes, I'm one of those people that, if people have questions, they can talk to me. As long as people are being respectful and It's fine if people get things wrong, as long as they say, I know I'm getting this wrong. I don't mean to, but I don't know what else to do. What do I need to know? I appreciate all that. And yes, I will have those conversations. But yeah, added to that, I really do appreciate it when people do their own homework as well.
I watched your post of exhaustion. It's not like I wasn't paying attention. And I watched how much your story changed in your posts from that. Hey, everybody, let's get this right. I got lots of energy for the moment in whatever way, to each post I had a little less energy, right? And so I'm not trying to tell you your story, but I feel like I've had parallel conversations with a lot of people, learning to respect their journey on that and how not to inflict my allyism on them sometimes. So
Thank you.
Well, let's change the subject again, because I'm dying to ask you about COVID and
Yes.
monkeypox and how did we get here and what can we do?
yeah, okay. So I am an infectious disease epidemiologist, kind of traditionally trained through veterinary medicine. So veterinary public health is the crossover. It was born out of food safety, of industrial hygiene, right back when horses did all the pulling, or back before they wrote books about slaughterhouses in Chicago that everybody has to read in high school. That was that. But I was this gelling of kind of the wildlife interface interest. So conservation, wildlife interface. So now you get into bushmeat, the bushmeat trade, wildlife trade, wild meat, food safety in wild meat, or rabies as an example of just risks that we think about every so often here, but people in other countries think about every day. So I got really interested in that wildlife interface. And that was as an exchange student in Zimbabwe, living and working in national parks and villages with heavy interface where you can't separate the wildlife from the people, from the domestic animals, right? Because it's kind of village living along a wildlife interface. And
Yeah.
and so I got really interested in that. We now call it One Health, ecosystem health, conservation medicine, choose your brand. I make jokes about Coke versus Pepsi in that way. And they all kind of mean, let's understand this holistic interface and sustainability and resilience that are relied upon each other, right? We are all relying upon each other, whether it's food security or clean water or protection of an endangered species, right? We all are connected. So that's a kumbaya statement. And then I really was interested in infectious diseases. And so I chose that part of the story to work on. So I've worked for a long time in the great ape community and the monkey community, looking at everything from spill over and back between humans and great apes around ecotourism, research, and or village interfaces and the risks, because we know that things like HIV came out of apes and monkeys, as well as many other issues. The evolution of malaria came out interacts with apes in some ways. Very interested in those. And so, used to kind of run around and say bad things are coming if we don't act differently. Bad things are coming, kind of a Chicken Little in my whole community very much, and enter COVID. So our interaction with bats, whether you're arguing that that was in caves, on the dinner plate, or in the lab, right? And people like to argue about where did it spill over, but there's less confusion about the fact that it was bats and that these viruses have co-evolved in wildlife, right? So wildlife are minding their own business in the forest or wherever they live. They've got their own diseases, some of which affect them and make them sick, some that don't, and they evolve together, just like we have our own set of diseases that are not animal related. But then you change that interface, you change the way we come into contact with each other, and it creates a new interesting way for something to spill over, right? And that is called a zoonotic disease. And we use that term right now to reference both directions, but there used to be different ways to say it. So I'm interested in that, and I've studied that for 20, 25 years in, well, kind of all over the world. I'm so cool, but all over the place.
You are cool.
So monkeypox, right, was discovered in a monkey in a lab in Europe and named monkeypox, but it actually comes from rodents.
Right.
And it has co-evolved in rodents. And there is some evidence that as we eradicated smallpox, its cousin, that there was an expanding niche for monkeypox to expand. That research is still in progress. We know that it has been spilling over because of the contact with rodents in village communities and urban communities in Africa, where those rodents reside, mostly across the central band of Africa from east to west. And that those have been problems and that they've been growing and getting bigger. Now with monkeypox, we are talking about the release from those local communities where it just used to, just like Ebola, just used to stay within those local communities, but with the connectivity of the greater world via differing ways that viruses and other things are transmitted, we are creating highways for those things to be distributed throughout the world quicker and better and more efficiently. And that is the monkeypox we are seeing today. The interesting thing about monkeypox is we saw this one coming, and there's a vaccine stockpile and people are being vaccinated. The normal bad thing about that is people in villages in Africa are not yet being vaccinated for the monkeypox.
Wow.
That's part of global health inequity, a whole other 10 podcasts. There is a movement to change that now as well. It shouldn't have to take that to be a global thing to do that. But in the end, it is pushing progress. And maybe we can learn to do better earlier as a result of that. So that's, I guess I could ramble on forever, but that's a semi-concise intro.
No, it's fascinating. What
Yeah.
can we do as people to maybe not have COVID or monkeypox, or do we have to stop eating meat? What are we supposed to do here?
Yeah, you're trapping me on the whole vegetarian thing. My oldest daughter would love that. No, I'm kidding. No, that's one solution. I mean, simply, you don't. So we know that there's different estimates, but 66 to 75% of zoonotic diseases have some form of wildlife that has to do with their source. We know that a huge amount of the emerging diseases, the new diseases, also come from wildlife, a subsection of that. All sorts of stats we could throw around, but it's that these are important avenues, these are important reservoirs of risk. And so, we can recreate a better relationship between science and our public.
Yeah, big time.
And that is bidirectional.
Yeah.
Scientists can be a little less elitist, and people can trust science a little bit more, and it ain't going to happen by magic, right?
Agreed.
So, one, we can try and reinvigorate a belief and a good relationship with science in our culture.
Yeah.
Two, we can I like to make up words sometimes that my students and my colleagues joke about. We could holistify, we could make more holistic our approach to global health. And many of us have been working for a long time on trying to get wildlife better connected into the story. And there is progress being made, but there is still a disconnect between the human health community, the domestic animal health community, and the wildlife environmental health communities. We need to better connect them and help them become better teams at holistic approaches so that we can work on these types of issues better. Third is policy and prevention policy. And it's, again, this thing, we are ambulance chasers. We tend to react versus investing in prevention. And thus and part of this is just naturally, you can't do everything all the time. And how do you figure out how to spend limited dollars? And it's the same as everything, right? But we need better kind of structured preventive policy in One Health. And it's kind of like the Lorax has been screaming for a long time, and we haven't enabled those policies. They're coming and we're making improvements, but we need to get there. So those are the three. We need a better relationship with science. We need a better relationship between the sciences, and we need better policy to enable all of that as we go forward, in my opinion.
One thing that comes to my head when we talk about maybe vegetarianism as being a possible solution. No dig, Jennifer, really. Like, this just literally just popped into my head.
I'm pushing my own agenda here.
I know. I'm a big old meat eater, so I'm just gonna put that out there. But I wonder, though, if maybe that's a bit of a privileged response,
For
because
sure.
aren't there communities, maybe also in Africa, communities where, and I apologize, I don't know as much about Africa as I'd like, and certainly not as much about Africa as you do, Dominic. I've not lived there. But aren't there communities where, say, agriculture that as we know it is not necessarily possible, so there's a reliance on animal protein, and so is there a way to maybe improve systems for them so that the animal protein that they are consuming is healthier, and maybe help prevent the human animal spillover?
So Raquel, you're saying that we could go into a village in Central Africa and bring a bunch of sheep and tell them how they can eat to protect us? Is that what you're saying?
Well, no, I'm not saying we go in. Well, maybe we can just make whatever animal they eat healthier.
So I just
Maybe.
nailed you. I just nailed
I
you
know.
with the history of this conversation.
Okay,
Yeah.
good.
Okay. So
Thanks.
eating is about culture, right?
Yes.
And
Yes.
food security is about culture.
Yes.
And we need to understand that through a cultural lens.
Right. And I
And
was trying to do that, but in
yeah,
a really
no,
ignorant
I trapped
way.
you. I trapped you. So quid pro quo, my friend. So no, but seriously, right? That is that those approaches have been tried
Okay.
forever. And they are looking at one set of risks and weighing them more heavily than other sets of risks. Local
Mhm.
people, meaning wherever they are locally,
Yeah.
but that's often confused with like traditional small village disconnected from urbanized whatever. So but people eat things for many different reasons, right? For taste, for choice, for cachet, for survival,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And we first need to seek to understand the culture and why they make their decisions.
Mhm.
And then I think there is an opportunity to say, okay, there are unintended consequences of those decisions.
Got it.
Just so you know, do you know why you're getting sick, or do we know why they're getting sick? And then do you know that a portion of this has an association with your food choice?
Okay.
Can we be non-judgmental about that? And can we care about them first in that way? And can we let them make their own decisions, which we should, rather
Yeah.
than try to come down on that, So all this is what we're trying to get better at right now when we talk about that. And it
Yeah.
is a social science approach to this issue, or a mixed method, a biosocial approach,
Mhm.
because we think of it, all the health people and the biologists come in saying, disease, disease, stop. You cannot ever eat another bat. Why would you eat a bat? Icky. And all these kinds of things, right? And it's,
Mhm.
it is not the way to try and change things. So I will say, Jennifer, in terms of vegetarianism,
Can't do
and
it, huh?
it is a choice. So we know two things. We know that agriculture and large scale meat production has a carbon footprint. We
Yeah.
argue over what size that carbon footprint is. We argue over the land use changes, the deforestation, all these things in different cultures about that. Those are people that want more meat based protein for a myriad of reasons, whether it is for nutritional status, whether it is because the world is driving towards wanting more meat because it is a developed country thing, whether it is food security, all of these kinds of things, right? There are drivers. We know there's an impact, and we know that's the argument is, well, we're providing more food security to more people, but it's having these effects on the environment. We have to continue to ask those questions of wild-based food sources and
Mhm.
ask about those trade-offs and drivers as well. Certainly, there's generally less of a carbon footprint than a mechanized kind of thing, but there's also more pressure directly on the wildlife populations in terms of those costs. So I say that if you want to be a vegetarian, like my daughter, who chooses to because she's an environmental science minded person, then that's great. We could get into the nutrition and the health part of that and cardiac disease and all those other things. And we can get into all that data and say, hey, that could be very good for you in other ways as well. What I don't think is by telling the world not to eat meat, are we going to, in a non-neocolonial way, come up with a solution, one size fits all for everybody on this problem that is fair and equitable in the way that we want to move forward in our global health.
Damn, you're smart.
No, I just made a
Yeah.
lot of mistakes. That's why I'm here.
So vaccine or no vaccine?
Personal opinion.
Yeah.
Yeah, vaccine. The data are extremely clear. The publications are voluminous about analyzing this. And the thing that science communication has not effectively done is tell us that this vaccine is different.
Mm.
We know that it's different in its how it's constructed, and people were fearful of that. Hopefully,
Maybe in one of those people.
I mean, I think if you weren't a bit concerned about this new type of vaccine and what it was and was not potentially going to do to you, then you're not paying attention. But I do think that hundreds of millions of doses and very few bad things, and you could say, well, what about 5 years from now? We can't answer that.
We don't know yet.
What we know is that to date, it is overwhelmingly safe and efficacious. So the FDA cares about two things. Is it safe and is it efficacious? It's overwhelmingly safe, but we don't know what we don't know. And you are more than welcome to make your choice on that perceived imaginary, and I say imaginary now, not like you're having a hallucination, risk. But we know that most vaccines we take so disease doesn't spread. This is not one of those. This cuts that risk, in half. There's different estimates or whatever. It does decrease transmission, and it does it by two ways. It keeps the disease from being bad once you get it. It keeps you out of the hospital. It keeps you out of the severe category. And there's a lot of evidence that it's not going to stop you from getting infected. It's going to stop you from overwhelming the healthcare system. And it's going to stop those with high risk factors from ending up as much in the hospital. And there's just no doubt that the evidence is there that it makes it better, but it does not stop it. Like measles, if everybody's measles vaccinated, we're not going to get measles. It's not that.
Right.
To be clear, we're talking about the COVID vaccine because we went straight from like monkeypox to COVID.
Oh, sorry.
We didn't make that clear. We are talking about the COVID vaccine. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
I like to jump around on topics.
Yeah, it's okay.
Well, the traditional, the monkeypox vaccine is available for those who get exposed.
Yeah.
And in our privileged society. And it is a more traditional vaccine that is more like the smallpox vaccine, and there would be not the scariness of newness with that one. Like that's so the COVID one, because it's a new vaccine, a new type of vaccine, and because it acts differently than traditional vaccines, the point is there. Yeah. So yes, it will likely keep you more out of the hospital, and it will likely stop you from spreading more to people around you, and it will allow you to get back to work and life quicker.
Yeah.
Excellent. In your prior career, you're about to change jobs. Did you get to meet Jane Goodall?
So now we're dropping the names. Yeah, I'm like the Forrest Gump of science, actually, right? It starts with we all grew up with Derek Jeter, right? And so you can
I have told that story.
Yeah, well, so we can Forrest Gump.
I have more of that story to tell, but I'll tell you once we stop.
Well, I do too. We could go there someday.
No, we're going to talk once we stop recording.
Okay, so I was working at Lincoln Park Zoo, and I had this history of working in different parts of Africa, and a big passion for Africa and for this kind of wildlife human domestic animal interface in Africa. And I say Africa as a continent because I do actually mean like 23 countries all over. So,
Yeah.
and we hired somebody to build, if you go to Lincoln Park Zoo, they have the Lester East Fisher Center for the Conservation and Study of Apes. It's an amazing place. And we built a conservation science program on top of that building. And we hired a wonderful first director for that, named Elizabeth Lonsdorf, who is now at Emory University. And she came out of the graduate program of Jane's graduate students, continuing her work after Jane left the park to go be Jane, right? So first it was Jane, the ape studying person, and then she left and there became Jane, the global conservationist, and then became Jane, the Nobel kind of gravitas person. So when she left, the Gombe Stream Research Center and the Jane Goodall Institute still work on that. It was a partnership with the University of Minnesota. And she came to us, and the first thing she did is show me a picture of Fifi, if you've read Jane's books, who was completely bald of any hair, and one of her babies who had complete hair. And there was, they think, a parasite that they got from dogs in the local village that gave them mange. And she said, if you hire me, we're going to do this. And she held that. And I was like, we'll take her. And so she was hired. She's fantastic. We built a health research program, the Ecosystem Health Project in Gombe National Park in Tanzania. And that's a partnership with Jane. It's been running now. I just kind of left the project recently, but we started in about 2003. It's still going, and it's got a ton of people involved with it, partners from all over, and it's really fantastic. And I've gotten Jane, when she takes a break, she goes back to her house in Gombe National Park, and then people who are there, because you spend significant time there, hang out with her. And there's a lot of stories about how Jane tells stories when she's sitting around the house, or things that Jane, the personality is allowed to come out, and she's not the global presence, but she's just Jane, the cheeky British woman who's sitting in the forest telling stories, kind of thing. This picture in my background is actually the beach in Gombe National Park on Lake Tanganyika in western Tanzania. There's some sea spouts, and this is the boat. So that you can only get to this park really by boat or walking. And this is one of the park boats that's coming. And this picture was actually taken by Anton Collins, who's one of the long-term research managers there. And I love to use it as my background because it's just, so the Congo is right on the other side there of that lake. So those of us who grew up in Lake Michigan, this is very much like the Lake Michigan of Africa.
So for people who are listening, go to the YouTube channel and check this out so you can see the picture.
All right. I think I asked all my questions. How about you, Raquel?
Well,
not that I couldn't come up with a million
I
more.
know.
Say one more word about Jane. Let me just say one, give you
sure.
a little bit more. Sure. So I had not planned, I wasn't a person who grew up reading the books and things like that. I certainly knew of her. I grew up a National Geographic reader, but I wasn't an anthropologist. And I actually wasn't as into apes until I started working with the Mountain Gorilla Veterinary Project, now called Gorilla Doctors, on mountain gorilla issues in Congo, Rwanda, and Uganda, DRC. And then I've done a lot more with apes in a lot more places. So she came to the zoo. She hated zoos, and we had just built our entire building off of 5 to 10 years of welfare-based behavioral data research, and said, here's how you do social grouping, here's how you do space use, here's how you design for good, healthy behaviors and communities and mental health and apes and things like that.
That's
the
incredible.
Zoo community, the good, quote unquote, zoo community has
That's
really
incredible.
worked hard on that. Actually, a lot of this leadership comes from Zoo Atlanta down there. Yep. So she came to be supportive of this and do a talk and things like that. And she said, this is the direction we need to go. So we had a little cocktail thing for her, kind of behind the scenes, just a few of us. We wanted to pitch our project to her in Gombe. And she's kicked a lot of vets out of the park. They carry dart guns, they try to dart the animals, get blood and stuff like that. And we were
Wow.
designing a non-invasive observational health research project. And so they said, okay, Dominic, you're going to pitch it. You're going to lose the $10 words, drop the jargon, speak like a human, and go talk to her. And as I was carefully constructing my sentences, when it was my turn, talking about the disease in the park and the animals, the perception that it came from humans and tourists or researchers, and that I had a thought on how we could start to make a way into answering those questions scientifically, she interrupted me in the middle and said, stop, 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 stop. And I was like, oh no, I blew it. They're going to hate me forever. All my bosses are in the room. And she said, what I hear you saying is, you know, there's a problem, you understand that problem, and you think you have a productive way to help that's going to optimize the welfare of the chimps and their sustainability. And she said, anybody who comes to me with that, I'm supportive for a partnership. So let's just go. I don't need to hear any more. And I was like, oh,
Wow.
and so two things, and this is the cliche, two things changed my life because I had not planned on being as impressed in that way. And who am I to be impressed? But it's personal. One, she does have a presence that is different. And, you know, you meet, if you're lucky, sometimes some of these types of people, and they just have that calmness and that they get it and the clarity and things like that. And that was just palpable and interesting first time I encountered it. And the second was, it changed my thought about being a researcher. And I've been an applied researcher ever since. And we talk about metrics and impact in every business and things like that. And one of my biggest metrics has been, are we helping? Are we running research for research's sake, which is okay if you're answering questions and generating knowledge? Or is it our job to make a difference with the research that we're doing? And this is part of my kind of yin and yang issue with academia and working for nonprofits, right? Nonprofits are aimed at helping. And academia is less aimed at that. And so that was a big wow moment for me that I've had. And now that I'm kind of a leader, I can help us think through those metrics of how do we measure how our work contributes to that, and make sure that the dollars that people are giving us are also pointed in that correct direction of intent. So I wanted to just spiel that for a minute, because that's my personal Jane testimonial in that way.
That's an
Wow.
incredible story.
That is very impressive. Well, you know, and I think maybe that's leading to a way to tie the
I was
two
thinking the same
together.
thing.
Yeah, is that, Dominic, you're talking about deferring to the people in the room who know, and then taking the dollars and the knowledge and making a difference. So how are you doing that in your daily life? How are you making a difference for people and domestically and in your own growth and maybe the growth of your family?
Yeah, I'm really excited about this. I used to teach, global health and cultural international medicine, and my goal was get rid of the bad American syndrome. I don't want to see a student go out there and be that person again. And that's a very simple version of that, and a very judgmental version of that and things. But I was like, I had seen so many students come that way. That was kind of my mission. But over time, and many of my students taught me a lot of this as well, because I've had many students that were from different countries. I've had very few domestic students, as I've said. I now work with a lot of anthropologists and a lot of social scientists on how do we create a humble start? How do we lead with humility, right? You don't have to be a great humble person to lead with humility and teach it and train it and practice it in terms of continuous improvement, right? So realize who we are, have a second thought, and get better, right? And improve, continuous improve. My parents were continuous improvement consultants. And so that is one, is start from that perspective, model that perspective the best you can, and reinforce it the best way you can in everything you do daily and the partnerships you create. I'm now in charge of partnerships and things, not completely, but the other thing, and I tried to start this at the university, a little harder. This was about gender and veterinary medicine, but it's also, when you look like me, you have the responsibility. So the first thing I asked my current institution is, why are you interviewing me? You should be going for somebody else. And they said, well, skill set, experience, blah, blah, blah. And so I feel, I would call it guilt, but it's actually a great responsibility. I'm going to turn that into a positive thing.
Great way to put it.
To use what influence I've begun to gain, which is not a lot yet, to blast doors open. So my goal has always, I have a master's and not a PhD, and my goal of graduate students was kind of like that old cliche of sergeant, the drill sergeant. Once you get over me, then you're better. So you're version 2.0. The goal is you're going to be better than me, and we're all going to improve. That's didactically and all that. But I kind of feel like my goal is to be as good as I can, blast open the doors, create the space for people who know what they're doing to come in and help to get it right. Because I'm not the guy who's going to know how to do it all, but I'm the guy that more and more is beginning to be able to blast open that door. Now, then I also have to work with people to say, once that door's open, I need you to be organized, and I can help be a part of that, or you can tell me how to be a part of that. Like, you can say, we got it, get out of the way. Or we can say, yeah, help us strategically plan, then get out of the way. Or tell me what you need after that. So my goal is to do that, whether it's gender, sexual orientation, race, ethnicity, etc., in that way. And when you think of environmental science, like, we ain't there yet, right? There's opportunity to blast some doors open and do that. Inclusivity and safety and sustainability and resilience and all of that kind of stuff. So I feel like that's my challenge. I'm still doing a ton of learning and digging in, always open to any criticism or help in that way. But that's what I feel the new mission is, and I'm excited about it. It's still hard because I'm a passionate guy. I like to charge through the door. Sometimes there's a lot of people standing behind that door, and sometimes it's good to blast that open. And other times I'm a bull in a china shop, and it's a passion-based bull, but I got to chill out, and I'm trying to work on that, but I get very excited. So.
Well, Dominic, thank you for doing the work, and thank you for leading with humility and being open enough about it to say, yeah, I get some stuff wrong, but I try, and I'm probably going to get some more stuff wrong, but I'm going to keep trying. So thank you for that.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. And thank you both for the podcast, for the almost book club that I almost joined, or the real book club that I almost joined. But following your conversation has been a part of what's really helped me. And I certainly have huge respect for you and your journeys, and the fact that it's so cool to get the answers, right? X many years later. And it's super cool. And I'm really proud to have come from the same place as you and to be involved. So thank you.
Thank you, Dominic.
Thanks.
That was such a fun conversation.
I'm blown away. I have tears in my eyes because I feel like this is what we have been asking for since the beginning. Where are the white men of privilege being willing to stand up and say that this is what we need to do? This man is walking the walk.
Yeah.
I'm incredibly impressed and humbled, and I've got goosebumps, and I'm so excited. I'm so excited to see him doing what he's doing.
Yeah, I am too. And I'm excited that he takes it home too, that he's talking to his wife about it. He's talking to his kids about it. Yeah, he's on his own journey of learning and growing, but he's sharing that with his kids, and he wants, and his family, he wants them to be on their own journeys too. It's like he said, he's blasting the door open and creating space. He's doing that at home too. And I'm sure there's people who are in his life, other people in other spheres of his life, they're getting the same reaction, because they're like, hey, there's this guy, this white guy of privilege who's doing X, Y, and Z, and he's having some conversations and having some talks and thinking about some things that, maybe I can do it too. He didn't die from having the conversations. Maybe I won't die from having the conversations either. I think that's awesome.
Takes such bravery.
Yeah. And it's awesome that he's not taking it personally. It's not about him. It's about being a better citizen of the world and being a better human.
I loved his embarrassing story number 1 and embarrassing story number 2 because it's just so wonderful to see someone being honest enough to talk about it, because those are the conversations that we need to have. But
Mhm.
also it made me think of some of my embarrassing things that I've done. But yeah, that was really
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah, it was good. It was a good conversation.
Yeah. Bye, Raquel.
Bye, Jennifer. Thanks everyone for listening today. We will be back with more Madness Cafe next week. You can find us on Instagram at Madness Cafe Podcast or email us at madnesscafepodcast@gmail.com. Bye.